The changes in the education sector, the way we assess students, the rise of digitalization and artificial intelligence, the changes in the learning environment, and many other unusual and controversial questions. We will be examining them one after the other in this channel. My name is Daniel Wiśniewski, and this is Education Chatter. Welcome to Education Charter. Today we are going into the world of humanities, the people with beautiful souls that focus on looking into themselves and developing their skills that somehow are being misunderstood, and for some people seem to be not useful. Today we're going to discuss with Professor Eleanor Dickey from the University of Reading, who is the expert, or an expert, as she said, in ancient languages, Latin and Greek. And we will ask her a few questions about why people study those. Welcome to Education Charter. Eleanor,
thank you.
Thank you very much for accepting the invitation.
You're welcome.
Let's hit it, really. But first, I really wanted to hear your story. Why did you ever decide to go into that direction as a professional activity? What's your story behind it?
Well, I just really, really like Latin and Greek. And this is something that started when I was very young. So I was probably about 8, and I was living in a very ordinary, very boring suburban town. And I encountered the Odyssey, and I thought, hey, this is great. This is not ordinary, and this is not boring. This is really fun. And my mother, who had studied English but hadn't studied classics, said, I hear it's supposed to be much better in ancient Greek. And I said, I don't know ancient Greek. And my mother, who was feeling a smidge out of her depth at this point, said, I understand that one is supposed to start with Latin. And I said, I don't know Latin. And well, you couldn't do that in primary school in my boring suburban town, but eventually I reached an age where you could, and I did, and I discovered that indeed I really liked Latin. And so then I went to university, and I thought, I already knew I liked the ancient world, but I thought I was going to be an archaeologist. So I took archaeology, and I also took Latin and Greek, and very quickly I realized that, well, yes, archaeology is fun. For me, Latin and Greek were much more fun. So I just had a wonderful time studying those languages. And then I discovered that I could go on studying those languages, and I could do graduate work, and I could get a doctorate, and I could get a job teaching other people about the ancient world and teaching other people those languages. And I still love them. I still think they're fun. And so basically, I do what I do because I really, really enjoy it.
Right. Right, but imagine, okay, we spoke just before starting recording this, that I will, within this discussion, what I will do, I will be the bad guy. And what I'm proposed to do is like, I know that you do not watch this kind of stupid American TV shows, but I will try to be the Sheldon Cooper. Sheldon Cooper is a character in a TV series that is an American one. It's called The Big Bang Theory. It's a story about a bunch of astronomers, people that very young people, young PhDs and professors at university somewhere in California. And they often have this joke that, if we will not get the funding will go to the humanities. So the question is, why would you give the funding to humanities? Why would encourage people to study those if there's no application for it? Or is there?
Yeah. First place, I would never say that you should give like all the funding to the humanities. I think it's important to have a wide range of different subjects. I've got a cousin who is a professor of astronomy, and he says that one of the things that happens to astronomers is people are always accusing them of like not getting real about stuff that's actually happening on Earth. And that sometimes astronomers are able to use kind of information they've got from their telescopes to help archaeologists figure out what was going on many years ago. And then suddenly everybody says, oh, you know, now they're being useful. Now they have this practical application to the humanities. So it all kind of varies. Any subject can be attacked, and I'm in favor of having all subjects well represented and well available for students. But why the humanities in particular? Well, I think, like many other subjects, the humanities can teach people really valuable skills. So when you study something at university, particularly when you study something that's not that easy to learn, you learn a lot of self-discipline. You learn a lot of skills in how to absorb a large amount of information in a small amount of time. And you learn skills about how to apply information that you have absorbed effectively and efficiently. And that makes you better at doing other things. So when I was in my first year at university, I studied ancient Greek, and I really had to kind of learn a lot about learning skills and about time management and things like that in order to kind of fit into my head all the stuff that you need to learn when you learn ancient Greek, because there's a lot of things to learn. And a bit later, I took a very intensive physics class, and it was a whole semester of university physics in 4 weeks. And nobody ever passed this class, according to the teacher, who was very proud of the fact that nobody ever passed this class. And I got an A in it. And he couldn't understand why I was able to learn his physics class. And he asked me, and I said, because of ancient Greek. And it was true. If I had tried to do that physics class without having first done ancient Greek, I couldn't have done it. But learning ancient Greek had taught me the skills I needed to learn physics. And it taught me the skills I needed to do all kinds of other things as well. So I think I could have, of course, done that by starting out with physics. I'm not saying there's something special about the humanities in terms of the skills you learn. Clearly, those were skills you need for physics too. So there's skills you can learn with physics too. But it's because high-level academic work is so difficult, it's important to do something that you actually like. It's just not possible to teach yourself that level of discipline and that level of intellectual rigor unless you actually enjoy what you're doing. And some people do enjoy physics. I have cousins who do. My father was an engineer, and he adored engineering, just the way I adore Latin and Greek. But I wouldn't have adored engineering. That was very clear to me from a very young age, and I wouldn't have adored physics either. I adore Latin and Greek. And so it's important that there be this huge range of different subjects available so that everybody can find something that they love enough to enable them to learn those skills.
Correct. You see, it's actually, it's one thing that I really enjoy about humanities in general. They actually teach you to think. I'm very much into philosophy and all kinds of streams of philosophy that allow me to question things. And they taught me so much as a person. They taught me to question the state of the art on everything that is happening, both in societies, in economy, in politics. And I think these skills, especially the ability to think critically, the ability to teach yourself. You said you cannot one thing that you've learning the ancient Greek was the rigor, was the discipline, was the ability to teach yourself. The way that you discovered yourself as a person and you discovered your learning way, because everyone has a different way of learning, was good in itself. And it's beautiful in itself. But then again, people say, how would you really apply those? Are there any industries that apply, I don't know, Latin, Greek, ancient languages? Is there any professions that, imagine that you're not a researcher Okay. Are there any professions that actually can be applied? These skills could be applied for. Imagine, that you're not a researcher. And so the question is, where are your alumni going to when they finish, when they graduate?
Alumni of a classics program have the same broad range of career options as alumni of any other humanities program. It's not pre-professional training. So lawyers, for example, are very often former classicists. Bankers are very often former classicists. Politicians are very often former classicists. This is actually a sore point with us in the UK at the moment, because Boris Johnson was a former classicist, and the classicists tend to be embarrassed about that. But historically, politicians have quite often, if you want to be a politician, quite often what people have done is study Latin and Greek. So the only careers it doesn't really prepare you for are the ones that require something else very specific. For example, in the UK, if you want to be a doctor, you need to study medicine starting at the undergraduate level. In the US, that's not true. So if you're pre-med in the US, you don't have to major in a science subject. And I have heard, although I don't know to what extent it's really true, but it's something that's widely believed, that medical schools look very favorably on people who are pre-med and have done all the pre-med classes, but have their actual major subject in classics or another humanities degree. That's kind of considered more impressive than ones who have majored in science. So basically, a classicist can do anything except things that require another specific skill that the classicist has happened not to acquire.
Correct. And I wanted to ask you about, let's say, the specifics of your specialization. Because, of course, you teach ancient Greek. How is it to teach a language that is not spoken? What are the challenges of it, really? What kind of students do you have? And what's the feel about
it? Well, I've taught ancient Greek mostly in the US. And in US universities, most of the good universities have a foreign language requirement. So the university will just believe that you shouldn't get a degree from that university without having acquired the intellectual breadth of really learning another language solidly. And there are many students who feel uncomfortable about speaking a foreign language. They don't want to do French or Spanish or Chinese precisely because of the spoken element. And so what you often get in a US university, if you teach Latin and Greek, is students who specifically do not want to speak. And that's why, in many cases, they have chosen to study Latin and Greek. And of course, in the US, you don't choose your major subject until the end of your second year. So many of our majors are people who didn't originally think they wanted to study the ancient world. They studied Latin and they studied Greek because they wouldn't have to speak. And then they discovered they really liked them. And then they discovered they really liked the ancient world. And then they become classics majors. So what I actually saw from teaching Greek in the US is that the fact that you don't speak it can be really, really valuable. There's, of course, another angle, which is that you can speak it. I don't speak ancient Greek, but there are people who do and who swear by it as a teaching tool. So it doesn't have to be taught as a non-spoken language, although that is how I taught it.
And Latin? Because Latin does have applications in, I don't know, legal professions and medical doctors and so on. I mean, yes. Is there any, you said, okay, if you want to be a doctor, for instance, I'm coming from Poland. In Polish universities, we do have Latin as an obligatory class for medicine majors. And so is Latin then useful? I mean, I also heard that if you speak Latin, it's much easier for you to learn any modern language because many of them originate from it. But I don't know.
That is
to what
less
extent are you
true than many people think. So there are the Romance languages, so French and Spanish and Italian and Portuguese and Romanian. These do come directly from Latin, and therefore learning Latin does make it easier to learn these languages. However, if what you really want in the end is Italian, it would be more efficient just to learn Italian. It's not going to be efficient to learn Latin if what you really want is Italian. And then there are things like, say, Polish, which do not come from Latin. So Polish is related to Latin, but it's not descended from it. And therefore, learning Latin isn't really going to help you learn Polish any more than another Indo-European language would. So languages come in families, like people, and they're families that are historically related. And English and Latin and Polish and Greek and Hindi are all Indo-Europeans. They're all related to each other. And that means that they have certain features in common. Most of these languages, for example, have grammatical gender. English doesn't have grammatical gender. We've lost it. We used to have it, but we lost it. And therefore, if you learn a language like Latin, you learn about grammatical gender. And then after that, it becomes easier to learn another language that has grammatical gender. But I don't think you necessarily get more from Latin than you would from another language that has grammatical gender. Do you see what I mean? It's always useful to learn another language. And once you've learned one foreign language, it will always be easier to learn a second one after that, especially if they're related, but even if they're not related. But that's the main point, rather than there's something special about Latin in particular.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, I can relate to that. I speak a few languages, and speaking of, like, I don't know, the ability of speaking Spanish helps me to speak French. Although French is much more gymnastics of the mouth, and it's in fact, in my view, much more difficult. But anyway, yeah, correct. I mean, if once you already know the one system about the languages, is actually helping you to learn others. And even more, one thing I actually discovered when I was studying English is that I understood my language better, my mother tongue much better. I understood the system of it. And I spoke much better Polish after learning the foreign language, because I understood what language is for and how is it actually structured. And
yes.
If you gain this systemic view on languages, you start to understand those little, those little ins and outs about it. And in fact, you know, for my very geeky way of being, I even enjoy playing with it somehow, because I start to identify the origins of certain words in different languages in order to see, okay, that's a funny word because it originates from something else and is actually pretty strange. But you can really much better understand your own village and your own culture after learning the foreign language. And it happened to me when I went on Erasmus and I studied in London for a year. I came back to my village and I thought, okay, now I understand my village much better. And that's one of the, I think, beautiful things about languages and humanities in general, about languages in that they are kind of hosts of culture. They are kind of those grains of culture that you can really dip into. You can understand people's thinking behind the language, and you can learn to understand those people by listening to their language and learning their language. And that's I think is something really enriching. I always found it enriching to talk to people from other countries about everything, and languages were indeed one of those elements that helped me do that. So wonderful on this.
Right.
about the students cohorts and the fact, are people still studying those languages? You said that, you did it because you simply loved it, and you cannot really excel in anything unless you really love it. I can agree to that, and I can relate to this. Like I studied many things that didn't seem to have, let's say, monetization possibilities, and yet, how is it with your field of specialization? Is there any trends upwards, downwards, with respect to the number of students that apply there or admit there to go into that path?
I haven't seen big fluctuations since I started teaching, which was about 1995. I've seen at some times in some places it may go up, and at some times in some places it may go down. I haven't seen overall trends that would be kind of beyond particular times and places. That doesn't mean there aren't any. It just means that I, in my small world, haven't seen them. I think 100 years ago, a much higher percentage of the people at university would have studied Latin and Greek than is the case now. But then again, many fewer people were at university 100 years ago than now. So whether there are, in absolute numbers, more or fewer people studying Latin and Greek now than 100 years ago, I don't know.
Yeah, and just I think I have a final question on this. So let's say that this number of people that are excited about languages and humanities relates or stays the same, and how about the learning of it nowadays? It's like, okay, I give you another question. Try to switch this. There's people that say, okay, now we have artificial intelligence. Okay, now we have digital tools. Now we have the Google Translator. There's even people that say that soon enough we're going to have translators that will be able to translate in real time the languages we speak. So as a result of that, we will not have to even learn another language because we can just speak it, the mother tongue, and it will be simply translating to another somebody else's with a voice recorder or with a speaker. Okay, so in this sense, is it possible that languages will become obsolete?
Not that languages will become obsolete, no, because everybody still needs to kind of like communicate with their family. It wouldn't be at all practical for the baby, instead of learning how to speak to its mother, to go through AI. So I think language per se is a very fundamental part of how humans interact. And as long as humans are going to continue to exist and continue to interact with each other, they're going to need to do it with language. In terms of whether learning a foreign language would be necessary, I would say it's not necessary now if you're an English speaker. Many English speakers travel the world without learning any foreign languages. And I don't see AI really being relevant to that or being about to change that. The fact is that if you're an English speaker, you don't need to learn another language. It might possibly change the equation for people who are not English speakers, but not having ever been one of those, I wouldn't really want to pronounce. You know more than I do what it's like to be a non-native English speaker. But given that, since it was never necessary to begin with, and especially with Latin and Greek, people don't do it normally in order to be able to read something that isn't translated, because after all, most of the stuff that most people want to read is translated. You can get a really good translation of the Odyssey, just the way I did when I was 8, much better than you'd get from any kind of AI, however impressive, however far in the future. So you know, I just don't see that making a difference.
Thank you very much for inviting us to this beautiful world of humanities,
You're welcome.
which I think is a place and a sphere that shows us that beauty of learning and the learning for the sake of learning and growing as a person has a value in itself. I will leave our viewers with a few questions at the end. What do you think about that? Is it indeed useful to study humanities? Have you studied in humanities? Has it been any useful in any way? Have you managed to apply it in your professional life? Tell us about it. Comment, subscribe to our channel. If you like what you do, what you hear, you will get notifications about the next movies that we will be producing. And for now, I wanted to thank Eleanor for joining us and for the discussion at Education Charter. Thanks a lot for accepting this invitation, and let's stay in touch.
Thank you.